I'm very, very excited about this one. Diane Pozefsky, she's Ph.D. and research professor in the Department of Computer Science at the University of North Carolina. And she is also one of our distinguished honorees tonight. So as we get ready for her, please enjoy the dessert. It looks delicious. She's going to be talking about eMentoring. So, obviously with the advent of social networking, sites like LinkedIn, Facebook's even got some of this, Skype and whatnot. Please stay seated if you can. She will be joining us fairly quickly. But get on up here and we'll get started. Thank you so much.
Okay. Am I on? I'm on.
You are on.
Okay. So I think this is one of those times you really don't ever want to have to be talking. It's my bad class time too, right after lunch. Hoping everyone will stay awake with it. One of the things that I always tell students is before you take a course from somebody, you should understand where they're coming from and why they're teaching this course. So I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to tell you why this is an interesting issue for me and how I came about to think about it. After 25 years at IBM, I went back to the university to teach. And one of the things was, what could I bring to the university and students that people who had been teaching at the school since they finished their Ph.D.s didn't have? And so I sort of went in two directions. One was some of the area in software engineering, but the other one was I had kept on looking and trying to understand how it is we got more people involved in technology, in computers. In particular, women and underrepresented minorities was a really big item for me. But when I started looking at that, what I discovered was people didn't really understand how naive much of the world was about computers. And so I started teaching courses that looked at computers in society and how people are impacted by technology. And it was rather shocking. I really hadn't realized the major disconnect that there are for many people with technology. They make assumptions about what technology can and can't do for them that are very often naive. And one of the areas in particular was communications. So what I started looking at is how has technology impacted the way we communicate? And when I started talking about what I'd like to talk about here, mentoring seemed like a really good area of communications to deal with. And there are lots of definitions of mentoring and what one mentors and how one mentors. But what I want to talk about is the techniques that we use to mentor and whether it really works or not. I said I was a teacher, and one of the things is we like to talk, but we also like to answer questions. So if anyone has a question in the middle, please feel free to interrupt. We'll figure out how to either get a mic to you or you'll just talk really loud and we'll do that. So feel free to do that. That's kind of the model I like teaching with. So communications. I want you to think back to Leave It to Beaver. Okay. How did people communicate then? Okay, so you would talk on the phone. Okay? You would go and see your neighbor and things like that. You would occasionally write a letter, okay? But that was really painful. And I'm going to talk about why that was painful in a second. But the communication was basically face-to-face, comfortable, the people you knew, the people who had a shared experience with you. You didn't have big gaps to deal with because you went to school with them or you went to work with them or you lived on the same street with them. There was a tight connection, and that made it easy. And in fact, why letter writing has always been a painful thing for people to do is we all have recognized that when you write something down, it's permanent. Okay? I mean, we look back at in the times of Shakespeare and things like that, and those letters still exist. Yeah, they're sold for millions and millions of dollars, and we talk about how much insight we get from them. So people crafted letters. And if you have to craft a letter, you spend a lot of time on it. If you think about going off to college, and I see lots of ages here, before the days of the internet, okay, well, before the days of the internet was also the days of expensive phone calls. So you basically lost friends with lost touch with all of your friends in high school because it was too expensive and too hard to keep in touch with them. And going back Thanksgiving, yep, you sort of saw them. Christmas, a little less. And by summer, you had a whole new set of friends. By the way, that isn't true anymore. Okay? My daughter is 26. She is still friends with kids that she has been friends with since she was 6 years old, 5 years old. In fact, her maid of honor was a friend that she'd been friends with since 5 years old. They keep their old friends, and that's really wonderful. And it's going to impact the way we mentor in the future, because we're going to have a different set of mentors. But back to this question of technology and communications. So we used to have an easy connection with people. Then we started going to more and more distant communications. When it became easy to make phone calls, you would have the phone call and they would be okay, but not as good as in person because you lost something. What did you lose? You lost facial expressions. You lost the fidget. You lost whether or not they're really paying attention to you. Okay? How many of you have been on a phone call and gone, yeah, and then all of a sudden you realize you haven't heard anything for 10 minutes? Really bad news. So everyone goes, oh, well, we'll go to video conferencing because that will solve the problem. Does that solve the problem? No. Who controls the camera? The person who is being watched, not the person who is watching. Right now, I decide who I'm looking at. You decide who you're looking at. When there's a camera in between blocking that and keeping those separate, all of a sudden, the rules change. And somebody says, well, you know, you got Skype and a one-on-one mentoring and the camera's right there. Right, but you can't see what I'm doing with my hands or my feet or whatever else. You don't know what's really going on there. It doesn't work. That's why we still keep doing a lot of research on teleconferencing. Okay, and they want it to be full body and full room, and it wants you to look like you sit down and you're sitting at the table next to them and all of that. And it's all great stuff, but we're not there yet. Okay? We lose a huge amount. The loss of bandwidth is not just in technology. One of the most interesting studies I remember seeing was in building design. Okay? Which is a better bandwidth? Somebody who is way at the other end of the building or the office straight above me? Which one am I more likely to talk to? Other end of the building. Staircases have zero bandwidth. We don't walk upstairs. And I don't think it's just because we're lazy either. Somehow they feel like they are in a different world. So don't really worry about them too much. Okay, but boy, if they're on the same floor, then I'm much more likely to do it. But we see the same thing here. We're losing nuances. We're losing a lot of information. Okay, that bandwidth of an email or a text or a Twitter or a pick your favorite one is really a lot smaller than we think because of all the nuanced things that we've lost. Have you ever written an email to somebody, put a smiley in it, being sure that they would understand that you were joking? And they didn't? Oh, yeah. And the reason we like telephone conversations and instant message and stuff like that is because we think that we can recover much faster. Well, we sort of can. But basically, once you have put it down and they have seen it or heard it, it's not the same anymore. You're never really going to recover from that. And that's pretty scary. So what does that mean when we're thinking about mentoring? Well, one of the parts of mentoring is a comfort and a willingness to open up and say things. And if all of a sudden you're not sure that it's being heard the way you're saying it, or you're not hearing what they said, how do you have a really good conversation? It's really hard. So you go, well, if you know somebody well enough, you can do that. And the answer is, depends how you know them. If you've already always known somebody in person, face to face, and watched their cues and their tells, and think about the difference between playing online poker and poker in person. Okay? Everybody knows good poker players understand tells. Okay? They recognize when people are lying or, bluffing. And all of a sudden, online poker, that's out of there. So all of a sudden, you've got a completely different game. The concept that it's the same game is just not there. But I just have the same problem. I noticed that when my daughter went off to college. I'll talk a lot about my daughter, and I like telling stories because I think people remember stories instead of principles. But when she went off to college, we started having conversations, and I realized I was missing something because I couldn't really tell when things were going well or not for her, because she used to hold her shoulders a certain way when she was unhappy, or she'd just look certain ways, and all of a sudden that wasn't there anymore. So now I had to retune myself. And, I'd known her for a few years. I knew her pretty well. But I had to retune myself to listening when I had never really listened to her before. And because I knew her well enough, I could make that transition. Well, what about the person who you know from work or friendly, but, you never really have that tight relationship? When you start losing those cues, what happens? It becomes harder. It really does. So what's the message? And by the way, I don't have answers. Okay? This is a talk about questions and things to worry about, not about answers, because there aren't any. So what you need to recognize is that you have a huge loss of information. Okay, there's another problem that occurs, which is that we say things that we won't write. How many times have you been in an email conversation with somebody and you go, why don't you give me a call? We'll talk about that one. And sometimes it's because it's too hard to explain. And sometimes it's because you know that you can do it piece by piece and get it a lot done a lot faster than if you were doing it the other way. But often it's because you don't want to write it down. Okay? And we laugh and we say, it's private. Okay? Private, internet, computer, don't match. They don't happen. Okay? There is nothing that once you put into bits that you can depend on being private. Okay, sometimes it's malicious, sometimes it's accidental, lots and lots of reasons. You want to count the number of breaches of security that happen every year? I mean, there is a website out there that puts them up, and it's hundreds a day, thousands a month. Okay? You don't know when that's your email server. Okay? So somebody else gets a hold of it and sees it. Or it's on your machine, and your machine goes off to be recycled, and somebody doesn't correctly erase the hard drive. And all of those emails that you thought were quite private aren't so private anymore. Xerox machines, okay? It was a piece on, I think it was 60 Minutes about 6 months ago, talking about federal government copy machines that, they forgot that there was memory there and that they were saving all of these documents and nobody had thought to erase them. So there are tons of things like that. The other thing is, once something is on the web, you lose control of it. I went to a reunion a number of years ago, and we had a website up there that was going to be a short-term, small number of people, so we shared all sorts of information about where we were going to be, when we were going to be, what our cell phone numbers were, da-da-da-da-da. So 2 years ago, when I gave a cyber stalking assignment to my class, basically I tell them to go out there and find out everything they can about me. It's a really good way to clean up your electronic footprint, let me tell you. They found it, okay? Somebody had made a copy, cached it, and so my whole class has my cell phone number, and I'm going, oh my God. The good news is I don't answer cell phone if I don't know the person. But nobody did anything malicious. Okay, somebody made a local copy because that was easier for them. They were carrying it that way and so on. And all of a sudden, it's out there forever. Okay? And I tell students that you think you deleted the post. You think you deleted that photograph. You didn't delete it. Okay? If you are really, really careful, you can. Okay? But you got to be a little geeky about it. You got to be a little paranoid about it. If you do all those things, you can get rid of it. But in general, you don't get rid of things. They're out there. So all of a sudden, we start editing what we say. Okay? And so not only is there the problem that the communications path is a lot smaller when we're doing eMentoring, but we're also having the problem that we subconsciously start watching out what we say. It's a problem. Okay? It doesn't mean you shouldn't e-mentor, because I'd rather see you e-mentor somebody than have no mentor, right? The other question, though, becomes how do you find mentors? Okay? Is it okay to find mentors electronically? Does that work? Well, it might. Okay, we've all read about people who meet their spouses online and so on and so on. But usually, the introduction is online, and then they spend some time with each other. Meeting people for the first time and understanding who they are is a lot harder electronically. Why? Because the persona we put forward electronically is, by definition, edited. We think about what we write. We think about what we do. It is very different than having spent a meeting with somebody and wandered out in the hall and having a chat over water and coffee or whatever else. You learn something about people that you don't know otherwise. So there's this comfort zone. And once you have that comfort zone, I've mentored for people who I knew in the past, okay, and I met them earlier. And that's easy, okay, because we had a good rapport, we understood each other, we knew exactly where we were coming from and what all of our hot buttons were. People who I have been sent a message from somebody, and which is my favorite one, going, I'm working with so-and-so, and they really need some mentoring about da-da-da. Well, do they really mean mentoring, or they just want some answers? And basically, even when they want mentoring, it turns out to be answers, because we can't make the connection well enough. That doesn't mean nobody can, but it's a whole lot harder. And it takes a little more time. Okay? I can, in one day at a networking meeting like this, or any other face-to-face meeting, I can learn so much more about you than I can in weeks of emails. Okay? I have people who I think I know pretty well from email, but doesn't hold a candle to what I can know about people face to face. So meeting people, okay, if you think about the different pieces of team building, they talk about forming, storming, norming. I forget what the last one is. But this forming of the mentorship is where the hard part is. Okay? Once you can connect with people, then it becomes, you build up what you want and you do it, and that's fine. But figuring out who this person is and what they are is harder. Okay? And that's where the trick is, to start doing it. Whereas once you know the person, continuing a mentoring relationship online is a whole lot easier. Though I do find, frankly, I do it by phone most of the time. And that's because I'm lazy, I think. Okay, I don't type all that fast, and I can talk a lot faster than I can write. And so therefore, I tend to like that better. But that doesn't mean that, but that's me, okay? And that's because I come from the day when I didn't type all my life, whereas students today can barely handwrite sometimes. So there's different models like that. So the issues are that the technology actually does impact what we do with mentoring, okay? And the other part is how we meet people. Okay? So this brings me to social networks and LinkedIn. How many people on LinkedIn? Yeah, it's most, okay? How many people are active on LinkedIn? Okay, a lot fewer. I respond to LinkedIn. But that's about all I really do. So can I use a social network to find a mentor? Maybe, okay? Can I use anything to find a mentor? Of course. The interesting thing is when I talk about technical mentoring as opposed to career mentoring, it's a completely different story, okay? Everybody in the web area especially has technical mentors that they've never met, okay? Because we know that Stack Overflow or Reddit, or not Reddit, there's a number of blogs there where we can find an answer to anything we want. And we also know very shortly who the names are that we trust. And that's easy to do technically, okay? That's a whole lot different than from a career point of view. So the question is, how do you meet somebody online? You are somebody sitting in the middle of the Siberia. We'll get it out of the country, so we'll keep not say anything bad about states. It's the middle of Siberia, and I need a mentor, and I want to use a social network for mentoring. Can I do it? Better than nothing, okay? But you're not going to put up a note on some board saying, I am in desperate need of a career mentor. Is anybody out there wanting to do it? Because you don't want to know what you get. But what you do is you find people and you talk to them just like you do when you network in person. And you create connections, and all of a sudden it starts becoming more comfortable. But don't think it's going to happen overnight. Okay? It's going to take a lot longer than you think. That comfort level, and the comfort level has to be on both sides. Okay? So it's not only how comfortable you get, but the other person has to get that comfort level too. So you have this problem that you need to overcome to get there. But it's certainly a way to start. Now I will separate mentoring from answering a question or one-shot advice. Okay? There's a whole lot different options there, and I'm really not talking about that because getting one-shot advice has a whole lot of ways to do it. And you can also listen to a lot of people and take a vote and see which way you want to go with it. That's a whole lot different than mentoring. But for mentoring and for getting that connection and that relationship, it's really a whole lot harder if you don't know the person. And so you have to figure out how to know the person before you can do it. It's pretty straightforward. So those are the sort of the big issues on e-mentoring is how do I do it, and how do I get the person? Yes, I love questions. Thank you. Except those lights are going to kill me.
Hi, my name is Monisha Jackson, and I'm with Accenture. I have a question, and I'm just wondering if this is a problem that you see with your students, but one of the challenges that I have as an executive is I'm required to do recruiting. And what I often find is that prospective candidates, particularly college students, have a really, really hard time conversing. And I suspect it's because a lot of the communication is kind of contrived. You talked about, you know, they can think out their responses. They have time to respond. They're writing and they're not really talking. They may not be, you know, communicating in full phrases or using, you know, acumen. They're just sort of, you know, exchanging information. And it's a challenge for me because I would not be comfortable putting someone like that in front of a client.
Absolutely.
But it's something that I don't know how you cultivate that type of communication with someone that's so accustomed to communicating virtually. So I'm not sure if this is something that you've seen, but I know for me, it's a challenge. I'm like, this person seems really bright. They have a lot of relevant skills, but they can't really, you know, they're not good in an in-person conversation where they don't have a chance to think about the response. That they really, you know, their faculties just aren't coming together in a way that, you know, lends to a client service environment.
You bet. So at our university, we have a category of general education requirements called communications intensive. And the requirement for communications intensive is that you're supposed to learn how to communicate about your field. And the fact that the university feels they need that categorization tells you it's a real problem. So I teach a software engineering class, and I meet with every team every week. And at the beginning of the semester, I ask them to tell me about their project and what they're doing. And they blither, and they struggle, and I say, I have 3 whiteboards here, draw on the pickboard and talk to me and tell me what you're doing. I'm your client, I need to know, or I am the person that you are interviewing with. By the end of the semester, okay, they are actually coherent. Okay? The problem is nobody asks them to do it. And the answer is you need to find schools where they care about communications. Those are the schools that you're going to find kids who can communicate. And if nobody at those schools are asking them to communicate, you're not going to be able to. It's one of those things that you have to practice. The other thing is writing. Boy, do my kids hate writing, okay? Because they haven't really been asked to do it, and therefore they really, really struggle with it. We do certain, one of the things I do is they can get credit for an internship that they took over the summer by writing a paper, a 12-page paper. 12 pages in one semester is not a lot of writing, right? I meet with them every week, okay? And they put in, they do a page or 2 every week, and we reiterate, and we reiterate, and we reiterate. So it's not that they're not capable, but they do not have the experience. did an interesting exercise this semester, that when they were writing up their project descriptions, I said, okay, you're going to write a regular one, and then I want a tweet. Okay? You got 140 characters to explain what your project is. They did a terrific job on that. The paragraphs were terrible, but the tweets were terrific. Okay? They learned to think a different way. All those articles about Google being, making us stupid, they've learned to think differently. Yeah.
In other cultures? How prevalent is this in other cultures? We deal all the time with Asia, Europe, all engineers, all kinds. But are you talking more about the U.S. only, or is this extended globally?
The students that I deal with as undergrads are primarily U.S. I teach at a state school, which means they're mainly from North Carolina, so on and so on. So I deal mainly with that. But I see the same thing with our master's students who are from around the world, is that they have been in places where they have been trained to get the work done and not worry about how they talk about it. Okay, they have just simply not been forced to communicate about it. So I don't know about undergrads at another university in other countries, but from what I see in our master's students, I think it's pretty prevalent. I think that we have divided the world into science and math and technology and the liberal arts, okay, and we don't think that the people on this side need to do the stuff that the guys on the other side do. I think the crossover has to go both ways. And I'm hoping that universities are starting to wake up to it. I'm starting to see some sign of that, but I think it is pretty universal. Okay.
Thank you.
Other questions? Yes.
Hi, thank you. I certainly agree with everything you said about the challenges of remote mentoring. But there are some aspects that may be positive that you could leverage, don't you think? And the example that I want to give is that I was asked by a peer to mentor an employee who's several thousand miles away, and so we got to know each other by phone. But I think that there's a certain privacy or anonymity that he doesn't have to look in my eyes that has created a very, very open discussion that may have happened more quickly than if he had been in my office.
And I think you're right. And I sort of pushed on the side of the bad parts because I worry about people not being aware of the problems. But there is like everything else, there is the wall that can be built, and sometimes that wall helps a lot. People with any sort of problems, okay, become much more comfortable and open over the net and electronically, and that makes them much more open to being able to have conversations and to do things. I've got a few seconds for one more question. Right here.
Quickly, so how about mentoring online and using more than one mentor at once so that it's easier online? Would that make it advantageous to do it versus trying to get a group of people physically to get together and help you?
So group mentoring to me is a little different, okay? And group mentoring often works very, very well because you don't have quite the same conversations. It tends to be more general, more one way. So I think that it's the privacy and the personal issues of mentoring on a one-to-one basis where I think the real issues come from. And I see I'm down to 10 seconds, so I will stop.
That was perfect timing. Thank you so much.